Hey everyone, Tim Clapham here for week 7 of the c4d215 course here on FX PhD. And as you can see, I'm in c4d and I've got the file open that we ended up with last week, where we've got this sound wave bouncing up and down. And with any project, obviously there's a fair amount of R&D involved, but one of the things I wanted to make sure with this was that it was render safe, because the tracer object is notoriously difficult to render if you're rendering over a network. Now, if you're not rendering over a network, then this isn't an issue, but most studios and most people that work may have more than one computer, and if you do, then you should definitely try and make use of network rendering using like Team Render, or maybe using something like Royal Render or Deadline or any other render management tool. So what I wanted to do was just check that this rendered okay, because we're using tracer in here, and as it happens it didn't render successfully. So I have a QuickTime movie to have a quick look at. Okay, here's the QuickTime that I've rendered out, and you can see it rendered in seconds. I did render over multiple machines because that's the whole point, and the problem that I notice is that every now and then we get these frames that look like this. I think what's happening is that each client, as it starts the job, or as it's allocated a new range of frames, the tracer object is kind of reset, and it takes one frame before it picks back up, or in fact it looks like it takes a few frames. I'm not really sure, but you can see that there, and if we scrub through, you get another point there where we've just got one little element, and this happens a few times. So obviously that's something that we need to address before we go any further and build a complex project. So one of the things you can do here is obviously select your matrix objects, right click, choose MoGraph, add in a MoGraph cache tag and hit bake, and then that will bake those curves for you. But I still had issues with this. It still wasn't perfect. It was like as if some frames were duplicated. There was something a little bit odd going on. I didn't feel comfortable using this solution, so I thought, okay, so how can we come up with an alternative solution? Because tracers are awesome objects. Depending on how you use it, the result is different. You can obviously trace a line like a particle as it travels along and build a spline like that, or you can do what we're doing here, where we connect all those elements together to create a spline. And they're two different approaches that would require two different solutions. What I really wanted to do here was build an espresso setup that will enable me to bake this out, so that I have like a key on every frame. So I've got a rock solid solution that I can then send to any render farm or any network rendering, and I'm guaranteed that it's going to be okay. And it's actually pretty fairly simple to set up, because we have like a matrix object that we're using to generate our spline. We can almost get rid of our tracer objects and just work with splines and take those spline points and link them to the points on our matrix object. Once we've done that, we can then record that spline down to a PLA, and we have keys for it. So the workflow becomes a little bit more convoluted and a little bit more complex, but then you know that what you're going to get at the end is what you see in the viewport. First thing I'm going to do here is just switch off this loft so we can see our tracer splines, and let's switch off that sound effector as well. And now we've got these cached, so I'm going to just clear that for a moment. And now if we jump forward and back, there we go. So now we've got our tracers just as single flat splines, and if we just press O to frame that, we can see the whole thing. So what I'm going to do is take that tracer bottom and just press C to make it editable, and if we switch to point mode, you can see there we go, we get basically a point on that spline. Let's just select all of those, and they will correspond exactly to where our matrix is generating those matrices, like so. So we have our tracer bottom. Let's select this one and press C and call this tracer top. And just to make it less confusing, maybe we should call this trace spline, so that we don't think it's a tracer object later on. We're looking at it in the timeline or something. I always try and keep all my objects with not necessarily unique names, but just names that seem to make sense. Next thing is I'm going to select all these objects that make up this kind of little rig, and just choose Tools, Naming Tool. Here's my naming tool down here, and I just want to add a space 1 at the end of all of them. You can use this to find and replace as well. It's pretty handy. It's a little bit limited, but it certainly has its uses. So I know that there are going to be more than one of these, so I'm just going to name these 1 for now. So let's select our spline top, because at the end of the day the bottom spline, nothing happens to it, it just sits there, but the top spline needs to move up and down. So let's right click on here and choose Cinema 4D tags, add an Espresso tag. Now your Espresso editor is going to open now. I've got mine docked in my layout. Let's just make it so that we've got a little bit more room to see all of this. Grab this top spline and just drop it in here, and then let's output the object. And what we want to do is we want to find the number of points on here, and we want to iterate through those points, and then we need to find our matrix object and iterate through all of the clones or the matrices that it's creating, take the position of those, and then move these spline points to it. Now obviously this isn't a very procedural approach. I mean, it is to a certain extent because we're still using our matrices, but we've now got rid of our tracer. So if we start adjusting the matrix, as in the count, then our spline won't correspond. So I would recommend keeping these as live tracer objects when you experiment to set this all up, and then if you do need to network render and you want something solid to bake that out, then you can then use this approach. Just duplicate your tracers and make the originals or the duplicates editable, and then enable your Espresso. Right, so here we have our object node, and we're outputting the object, which is referencing our trace spline top one. Next thing we need to do is right click, choose new node, Espresso general, and add in a point node. So a point node will take a point based object like a spline or a polygon object which has vertices, and if we input the object into the object input, we can then output these different options. So one of them is point count. So we could then grab our matrix top, and we could come here and we could choose object properties, count X, and we could link that point count to there. And we know that however many points that we have on our spline will correspond correctly to the matrix. I'm not going to actually do that because I'm not very likely to be deleting points from that spline. Let's just keep this simple for now. So we do want to output the point count though, because what we want to do is we want to iterate through those points. So we want to start at point 0 and go all the way through to whichever point number we end up with. So to do this, we add an iteration node. So right click, choose new node, Espresso, iterator, iteration. And what an iteration node does is it basically loops through a number of iterations that you set and performs the same expression. Well, it doesn't perform the expression, it calculates and executes the expression is the word I'm looking for. So the point count would be our iteration end. And that makes this a nice flexible approach because we can use this with various splines, and the iteration will vary according to the point count. Next we need to do the same kind of thing with our matrix object. So here we're going to output the object again, and then we're going to right click, choose new node, motion graphics, and grab the data node. And the data node allows you to input certain MoGraph things such as objects and extract data from them. So that's exactly what we want to do. So we want to take our matrix object and link that into the object port. Now the index refers to the number along the or the number that's created by the matrix object. So if you have 10 as your value in here, it will start at 0 and it will end at 9. So essentially the index here needs to be linked to the point count. So when we're on point 5 on our spline, we need to be on index 5 with our matrix object. And that's very easy to do because we can simply take this iteration that we're already calculating for our spline and we can link that into the index there. So now those two will correspond to each other. Next, we want to find out the position of the various matrices from our matrix object. And now we have our data node here, we can output the position, and you can see all the different parameters we can output for those matrices, but we only want to output the position. Now we want to take that position and we want to link that to the spline points. So we need to add another point node, so I'm just going to copy and paste this one and pull it over here. We're still linking to our original spline object. The point index refers to the point along the spline, and of course this needs to correspond to the MoGraph matrix index. So again we can use the output from our iteration node and just link that into here. And then finally, what we need to do is we need to add an input to our point node, because what we want to do is we want to move our points position to the position output from our data node. So we add a point position input. Let's just drag that up to the top. And then we take the position output from our data node, which is going to give us the position of each of those matrices, and we link that into our point node point position, which is then going to link our spline points to that same position. So now we should be able to, if let's just unhide our matrix top object, if we press play, we should be able to pull this up, and you can see that we have all of our spline points connected to it. Let's just undo and put that back where it was, and let's enable our sound effector. And now you can see, if we select that spline, we can even switch to points mode, and you can see that that's now working. Cool. You notice there is a lag there, a 1 frame lag, and this is to do with the order of execution and to do with priorities. Unfortunately, priorities are a bit of a sore point in Cinema 4D because we can't control the priorities of everything. Some things we can. For instance, the tag here we can. We have a priority parameter and we can change this. And at the moment, if I nudge through, you can see that we've got this 1 frame delay where the matrix is 1 frame ahead. If we change the priority of this to generators, you can see it appears to work. If we switch back to model mode, however, we've still got that 1 frame lag. We could also try to bake our matrix object, and maybe that will help, but unfortunately we've still got that 1 frame lag. We could maybe take our matrix objects, let's just clear that. Maybe we take these and we put them at the bottom. Sometimes things that you do to change the order of execution can actually be detrimental. So if we look now, that still looks okay. If we change this back to expression, it's still 1 frame lag. So I'm not sure that we can actually solve that using priorities, unfortunately. But what we can do is we can bake this out to keyframes, and if it's essential that everything is on the exactly right frame, which probably doesn't matter too much with something like this, it's still going to reflect the audio pretty much. But it would be nice, after all this effort, for it to be on the right frame. Once we bake this out to PLA, we'll be left with a bunch of keys in our timeline, and we can always just nudge those up or down, however we need to move them, to match the timing accurately. So not the greatest workflow in the world, but as with everything, there's a solution out there to be found. It's just sometimes a bit of a struggle finding it. Okay, so now we've found a solution, or hopefully a solution that we can use to bake out our splines and render over a network, and we should be good to set up our ID. Now let's just rewind to the beginning, come up, and I'm going to save incremental so we start with a fresh scene. Let's switch over to our materials. I'm just going to create a new material and call this background or BG, and let's switch to our color channel and load in an image here. The image I've loaded in, mlogobg.jpg, is just a JPEG of the background that we can use as a guide. I'm going to come up and add in a background object, and let's just drag that material onto there. Okay, so now we can use this as a guide for positioning our logo and our sound waves. Before we move on, I'm going to just organize the scene a little bit, because we've got all these other surplus nulls, for instance, that I added in. We have this random color effector, which we're not going to be using anymore. We have this sound effector. I'm just going to call this sound 1, so we know that this refers to this first curve that we are making. I'm going to add in a null and just call this number 1, and I just like to put these dashes in there just so that it stands out in the hierarchy. We can just put this in here and put the sound effector in there as well. Let's come down to our layers, double click, create a new layer. Let's call this scene. Let's call this audio waves, and let's call this logo. And you just double click to create a new layer. You can double click on here if you want to change the color of those layers. Okay, so I'm just going to add another null. Let's call this scene. So all my scene elements are going to go into here. So scene elements would be stuff like my background, my floor, any lighting that I might add, a camera, etc. I'm just going to drop that into there. This number one I'm going to drop into the audio waves, and if you hold down control it will add all of those elements onto that layer. And this delay effector, I'm going to use this on all of them. We're not going to use a separate delay effector for the separate elements. We can get away with just one, so we can put that as a scene element. Let's drop that into there. Okay. Another element that would be included with the download was an Illustrator file for the M logo. So the next thing I'm going to do is just choose File, Merge Objects, and import that Illustrator file. Just click OK on the dialog that appears, and there we have our M logo, and you can see the bounding box for it. You might see that as a white spline, but in fact if I press Shift V to bring up my display, I have selected wireframe disabled, but if we enable that we can then see our spline. Let's select that and let's reset the position to world 0, something like so, and let's just hide this number 1 for a moment. Select that spline again under the Object tab. I'm just going to uncheck Close Spline because I only want the top of it, and what we can do is we can use this spline to position our matrix on, and then we can transition into that as we animate our sound wave. We finally end up revealing the M wave. Let's add another null. Let's call this one logo. Like so. Drop that spline in there and then just drop this onto this logo layer. Next thing I'm going to do is add in a camera, and this camera I'm going to set the position, rotation, all to world 0, so it's essentially sitting right in the middle of world space. And I'm going to then hold down Alt and add in a null, and we can just call this cam pivot, and we're just going to sort of make a really simple crane device. If we make this our active camera, select the camera, and then let's just pull back on Z. Okay, like so, and we probably want to position this so that this spline that we've got lines up with the background plate. Now I don't want to move the camera up and down, I want to move the pivot up and down. So if we grab that pivot, move that. Now I'm going to do this fairly quickly. Let's just say -50. It's not exactly right, but let's just set that to -1250. And you can see it hasn't lined up perfectly, but you can spend a bit more time getting this accurate. Now I'd like to set this up so that we can visualize the end frame. So I'm going to come to the end of my timeline. And just for now, let's select this spline, hold down the Alt key, and let's just add an extrude. And we can just drop that onto there as well. And we have our floor material here. The floor is currently hidden. Let's make that visible. Select that. Okay, and you can see that actually what we want to do is take this camera, let's set that to say 15, so we're just above. Let's grab this camera pivot and just make it maybe -5. We just close that spline for a moment so we can see the geometry. And what I'm going to do is just pull this up just so it sits on that floor. Let's take this material that we've got, and I'll just call this logo. We're going to totally change this. And let's just drag that onto there for now. With our floor material, switch to the basic tab. Let's switch off the specular and let's enable reflection. Set that reflection to be around 50. And I'm going to add some blurriness. Let's set that to be, say, 10, maybe a bit less, around 8. And to speed things up, we can set our minimum samples to be really low, say 2, maximum samples 32, with an accuracy of about 10. And that will render much faster. So now if we just hit render, you can see the result that we're getting. Obviously the logo material is totally the wrong color. Let's just switch that off for a sec. We can then come to our logo material, let's clear that from there. And if we click on here on a Mac, you bring up your color picker and you can pick the color from there. Obviously, if it was a real job, you'd probably do it a little bit more accurately than that. Now I'm also going to switch to the basic tab, disable the specular. Let's enable some luminance, and in the luminance let's add, for now, come back to our color channel and let's right click and copy that. If we open this up, fold down our gradient, we can paste it into this knot. But before we can do that, we need to right click and choose user interface, show subchannels. That will then show all the different colors as, or the knots as separate line items, so we can then paste that color onto there. Now this is just going to add a nice glow around the edges of the object, and because our sound waves are flat, it's just going to mean that on this top part here, which is perpendicular to the camera point of view, that's going to be like this lighter color. So that will just define the edges a little bit more. And another thing we can do to define the edges is have some reflection here. So let's add in the reflection channel, and for the texture here I'm going to choose effects and then choose fall off. Now fall off works very similar to Fresnel, apart from the Fresnel is based on the camera point of view, whereas fall off is based on a user defined point of view, or direction I should say. So actually we're going to leave this as it is. So the direction is split into the 3 X, Y and Z components. So we want the fall off to be along Y, and I want it to be reflective on the top, and that's all. So what we need to do is we need to make this white at the top and black at the bottom. So let's just pull this red knot off, select this yellow knot, we can make that white, and then all we need to do is just bring that black up here like so. So it's only parts that are kind of pointing from minus Y to plus Y, so in other words pointing upwards, that are white. So that means that it's just going to be reflective along the top as well. So we have this nice glow from the Fresnel, and we have some reflection along the top too. And if we come back here, you can see that that reflection is indeed all along the top of the object. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this reflection and just drop this down a little bit. In fact, let's get rid of that altogether, but let's just take our fall off and drop that down. I'm actually going to set that to about 30. So we just get this slight reflection along the top. We could maybe make this fall off a little bit greater, but it doesn't really make much difference because this is really, it will make a bit of a difference down the sides here. So the reflection will kind of start to fall off down there. But obviously if we went round and underneath, then underneath areas wouldn't have any reflection. But we don't have any underneath areas. But we do have these perfectly vertical parts which are pointing towards us, and they're going to be black, so they won't have any reflection. There we go, that's looking pretty sweet. If we hide the floor object from the editor for a moment, you can see that we've got this extrude, and it's kind of almost in the right place. If we just render, we're getting that sort of blurry reflection. You can see that's looking pretty grainy, and that is because we've got these parameters so low, but you can see how quick that does render. So what I'm going to do now is come up and add in a target light. And let's call this the audio key. I'm just going to grab these and the camera, drop them all into my scene hierarchy and drop them onto that layer too. So the audio key is like the key light. Let's switch to all of our views and zoom out a little bit. Let's set this light to be an area light. And then I'm going to pull it back somewhat and bring it up a little bit, something like so. And let's just come back to our main view and just render. So you can see what's happening here is this light is illuminating the floor somewhat. I don't want my background to actually be part of the render, so let's disable that from rendering. So now we have black at the background. The other thing that I'm going to do is take this light, switch to the project tab, and I'm actually going to exclude the floor. So if we exclude the floor, none of that light is going to hit the floor. And if we hit render now, you can see that we still get our reflection. We get the illumination on our sound wave, but we don't get any illumination on our floor. Now we have the final frame kind of set up with our camera in place. We can start to bring in the other sound waves. I've set it up this way, almost working backwards, so that I know this is the end point that I want my camera to be on. This is matching the style frame that my client gave me. And now I can build the rest of the composition around it. And from our discussion last week when we talked about what we were going to do, if you remember, we're going to bring in a sound wave from each side, in front and behind, so they travel across, and as they drop down towards the end, this rises up and we reveal the M. So very simple in concept. We don't have a great amount of time to finish this off, but it shouldn't take too long. We can set one up and then duplicate that and adjust the keyframes, and we can do that until we've got 3 or 4 of these, and then we should be good. Now, setting up the first sound wave is probably going to take the longest, but we've done most of the groundwork here anyway, so let's just unhide this. And at this point we can actually start to use our layers. So let's switch off the logo for now, and also I'm going to just hide the background so that we can see what's going on. Let's also select our sound effector and switch off the visibility of the fall off, just to unclutter the viewport for a moment. So taking this first group, I'm going to set the matrix top and bottom to different values, and what that means is that's going to mess up what we've set up with our splines, because these have a certain number of points. If we change the number of points here, then these are going to be incorrect. That's not a big issue. What we can do is we can just take this bottom one, let's just delete that, let's take the top one, let's move that out of the hierarchy for a minute, switch it off, select the espresso, and let's just disable that. And all I'm going to do now is just add in a couple of tracers. So we can call this tracer top 1, and we can call this one tracer bottom 1. Select both of these, and let's just clear that loft out of there. So tracer top obviously links to the matrix top, tracer bottom links to the matrix bottom. Select both of these. We'll just set these back to connect elements. We're going to use B spline. We're going to set that to be uniform, and let's we probably don't need to increase the number of points. Maybe we do. Let's just see what that's like with some geometry. There we go. Okay, and if we add our cloth, we don't need the fracture here, so we can just get rid of that, put our material on there first. Okay, and there we go. So you can see the result of that. So what I want to do now is I want to take these two matrix objects. I'm going to set the count to be 30, and I'm going to just reduce the size to be about 1600, something like so. Looks a bit odd, not sure why. Let's just work that out. Okay, I think that was just a redraw issue. I just rewound and pressed play and it started working again, which is good. You can see there's our fall off travelling through. So that's cool. Select the root null of this group, and let's switch the coordinates tab and set the Z value to be 100. I'm basically going to move it a little bit further away. Now you just need to be careful, because as we move it away we're going to see the edges of it, and we don't really want to see those edges. So depending on how far you move it, just make sure you can't see the edge. Otherwise what will happen is as you move the spline, the sound effector through, as the fall off goes past the edge, you're going to get those really straight parts which will look ugly, and we don't want anything looking ugly. Next thing is let's select our sound effector, switch to the effector tab, and let's just have a look at the parameters we've got here. In fact, let me just collapse that down. You can do that just by control clicking on this little grey part here. And what I want to do is just enable the filter so that we're only going to sample a certain part of the sound wave, just as we did before. Let's increase that cutoff a tiny bit and reduce the compression just so that it's not quite so loud, I suppose you would say. And we're going to sample the average peaks, or the average amplitude of these, and I'm going to set this to be like 1000. I'm just going to guess these. I mean, what you can do is you could obviously jam out with some different parameters until you get the sounds that you want for each spline, but I'm not going to sit here and keep tweaking those. I'm just going to set these up randomly so that they all look slightly different, and it will give you a feel. And if you want to spend a bit more time tweaking it to your audio, then by all means do. So now if we rewind, press play, there you go, you can see the result. If we scrub sound, okay, so there we go. So what I'm going to do now is take this sound effector, and if we switch to the fall off tab and let's enable the visibility of that, we can just pull this from one side to the other, and of course it's going to draw that sound wave across and then draw it back again. So let's rewind to frame 0. Let's grab this and pull it so it's just off the side, like so. Let's look at the coordinates for that. So let's say 1250, minus 1250. And this is where you just need to make sure that you kind of plan your animation in a logical way, because 1250 seems like a good value there, but that's only if my camera remains static. So perhaps what we should do is we should just add in our camera animation, if there is going to be any, before we start setting all these keys. Otherwise we're going to have to go back and tweak everything. So let's just grab this camera pivot. If we make our logo visible again, come to the end, this is where we want it to be at the end, which is cool. So we've got our camera pivot here. Let's add a key for the pitch rotation, and let's add a key for the Y position. Let's select our camera. Let's add a key for the Z position here. Then if we come back to the beginning, what we could do is we could come in a little bit closer. We can maybe bring the camera up slightly. So let's select our camera pivot and let's set that to be, say, minus 35. So we're up above. We're going to see all of our sound waves a little bit more clearly now. And maybe let's just leave that. I'm not sure if we need to adjust that yet, but let's come back to our camera. Let's set that to, say, minus 700. So we're in a bit closer, like so. And then maybe if we move this up a bit, I'm guessing here a little bit, we're going to probably need to tweak these, but now we've got this kind of movement. Really simple still. Okay, I'm actually going to turn the audio off so you don't have to listen to that all the way through, but you'll still get the idea of what's happening, and we'll look at it at the end with sound. If we switch to the timeline, you can see we've got all these keys for our camera pivot, camera rotation. If we press Control and hit space, it will switch over to our curves, and we can press H to frame those. Now what I want to do is just come to each one, and I don't really want to have that ease in at the beginning, just an ease in at the end. So it's an ease out really at the beginning, but there we go. So there we go. So we just get this really nice soft slow down towards the end, and it kind of accelerates into it. There we go, like so. Nothing too amazing. But now we've done this, we can get to the beginning. We can grab our sound effector and let's just pull this back across. There we go, and you can see that coming into play now. And we probably want that to just be off screen there, so let's set that to be 1000. I'm going to add a key here. Come to frame 100. And if we set that to be maybe 1000. In fact, let's come right to the end and have a look. Okay, and you can see that's not enough, so we need to just make sure it's right off screen at the very end. So I'm going to set that to 1250. Add a key. Let's come back to my timeline. This second key, I want this to be around there, frame 100. Let's come to frame 50 in the middle here, and let's set that to be 0, so it's in the middle. And add a key. Now if we select that sound effector and let's press Control and hit space, and the reason I'm pressing Control to hit space, if I just hit space it will switch over to F curves, but it will be the previous F curves that I was working on. But if you have some keys selected and you press Control and then hit space, or you change it up here, the item that you have selected will become the active curve. So it's just a quick way of getting to to bring them that sound effector curve into view. And what I want to do here is, let's make this a bit bigger, press H, grab this first key here, let's pull that up, And the middle key, I really want to flatten that out, so not so it's flat, but just so that the sound curve kind of rushes into the middle, slows down, then rushes off this side, like so. So there we go, and you can see that actually happening. And let's enable our loft, and let's hide those matrix objects, and let's hit play. There you go. So I think if we come to our sound effector, switch to the parameter tab, this is too high, let's set that more like 800. Okay, and that's looking pretty good. So what I'm going to do now, hide that visibility, is I'm going to rewind to the beginning. I'm going to come up and save this, and then I'm going to take this group here, I'm going to control drag, create a duplicate, and let's call this 2. And now if we unfold this, let's select all these elements on here. In fact, no, missed a step. Let's get rid of that. If we do it this way, it'll be better in the long run. If we're happy with this now, we can take these two objects. Let's just switch that sound effector off. Let's just press C to make those two editable. Also want these to be on the audio waves layer. Now I can grab this espresso that I've got and drop it onto here. I can delete that original spline. Now if I open this up and just check that everything's still connected correctly, object here needs to reference this. So we can just put that as relative. Use start position, this object. So whatever object we put that tag on now, it's going to use that parent object as the link in here. And you can see that everything seems to be correct. Let's enable that sound. Let's just press play. And it's not working. Okay, well that's all part of the process, and things don't work all the time. So let's just debug this. Where's our matrix there? Let's just see what happens. So that's still working. We've still got the sound wave occurring there. Let's select this, switch off that loft, switch to points mode. And you can see that's definitely not working. And you know what? It's just a silly mistake. I haven't enabled the espresso tag because I disabled it before. If we enable that now, that should work. Let's just try it. There you go. So now it's working. So it's just a Tim error. Pepcac. Okay, Pepcac is a problem exists between keyboard and chair, which means it was my fault. Alrighty, so that's that done. And the reason I just wanted to do that is because if we'd have left them all as tracers and not made them splines, we'd have had to go through and do it for every single one. And this is really committing yourself to it, but now we can duplicate this, and we can, let's just change that to just a simple one. If we select all of those and come up to our tools, choose naming tool, and it's down here, hiding. What we can do is get rid of that. We can just say replace space 1 with space 2, replace, and it replaces them all. If we open this up, you can see that it's automatically used the correct items. Now if we select this number 2 and we set this to be at 50, and we select our sound effector number 2, and all we need to do is choose a different range of sound that we would like to use for this example here. So what I'm going to do is just go for some random choice here. Let's set the frequency to be 500 instead of 1000, and let's set the range to be 500 too. Okay, so now you can see, hopefully we're just sampling this small little area here. Now if we press play, you can see we've got 2 different sound waves. Okay, and let's enable these other elements. So, come to our timeline. Of course, we have sound 2. We have our curve for that. If we select all, and then choose key, mirror X, and then let's come to our key mode, grab this, and what I want to do here is just offset it slightly, just to make everything look a little bit more natural, I suppose. I'm just going to pull that up. Yeah, so it starts at like, I don't know, it's frame 12. Let's rewind, press play. Okay, and there you go. And you can see that we now have our two different animated sound waves. And I'm going to do this again, and I'm going to repeat this so that we've got 4 of these, and then I'm going to come back to you. I'm not going to make you sit there and watch me. Okay, so that's done. I've now got 4 of these. If we look at the timeline here, you can see that we have animation of our sound effect of fall off. They're all offset very slightly. If we select all of those and just have a look at the curves, you can see they're both going opposite directions. If we come and have a look at these null objects, we can see that it's at 100, 50, minus 50, minus 100. And of course our logo is at 0, so they're kind of 2 on either side of it. Rewind to begin, and let's just press play. Alright, so maybe they're peaking a bit high. The other thing you'll notice is that I took my logo material and I just created 4 variations that are all kind of slightly varying hues. And now if we render, you can see it's starting to look quite interesting. We're getting, you know, an okay looking result. The other thing that I would like to do really is to add in something like an HDR. Let's just grab an HDR onto this material. Just got some in the content browser. I'm just going to grab anything. I'm not really bothered about it, what it is right now. Okay, and we could maybe just drop that into like a layer shader, and let's add in a color. Open this up and just paste in that pink that I've still got in there, and we can just set that to like maybe colorize that, something like so. And now if we just come here, add in a sky object, let's drop that HDR on there. Let's set this with a tag, compositing tag, and set that to not be seen by camera. Now if we render, now one of the problems here is obviously our floor is rendering this sky, but you can see along the top of here we're getting that effect from the Fresnel, and hopefully we're seeing some reflection from this. It depends on the position of that HDR. Maybe that wasn't the best HDR to use, maybe one with a bit more sky in it, but no worries, it will still give us an effect, a nice effect. Let's just drop that onto our scene layer, and now we need to address the fact that obviously the sky is reflecting in the floor. So we can select this compositing tag on our sky object. If we switch to the exclusion tab, we can exclude certain objects, and if we exclude the floor, essentially we're going to exclude the sky from reflecting in the floor. And you can choose refraction or reflection, and also whether it includes hierarchy or not. Now if we render, you can see that we're only seeing the reflection of our audio waves. So we've essentially have our floor in there, only reflecting the audio waves, won't reflect the sky because of this exclusion. So that's a pretty handy little feature. Let's just save this. Now one other thing that you may have noticed if we render this is we're getting these lines where the loft has got 0 height. You may want to keep that. It means you get these lines all the way across, which is kind of cool graphically, but I think if we take this floor and we just pull this, let's just unhide that for a moment and just pull that up. Probably even 1 unit is enough, maybe 2. Let's just turn the sound off, rewind and go again. And you can see now that they're only showing up as they push through that surface, which is probably a little bit cleaner. So the final thing that we need to do is just bring our logo on, and we can use exactly the same setup for our logo. And the only thing that we probably want to do is we just need to morph it into that shape at the end. And there's quite a few ways we could do that. We could do that with a motion inheritance. We could do it with just using a simple spline effector, and then just blending between the two. Now I've switched off the audio waves visibility in the layer manager so that we can just work with the logo for now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of these. I'm just going to control drag to create a duplicate. Let's fold out that logo, and let's just grab all of these and drop them into there. So we don't need that null anymore. And we can just put all of these onto the logo layer. Now this sound effector has animation, so let's just hold down Shift to Control and we can delete that track, and we set that to 0. so that we are positioned there. Let's just press play and have a look. And there we go. So we can see there's our logo sound wave. Actually, they're all at -50, or at 100, sorry, they're at 100. So let's just, just select all those and set that to 0, because we want that to be in the same place as our logo. And I'm going to just take that color from there and drop the logo material onto there. Let's just switch off the loft and the cloth surface so we can see what's going on. So obviously this is much too wide and it's quite erratic, and we really want it to create this nice curve. Let's start by organizing this and select all of these elements. Again, we're just going to use our naming tool and just change space 1 with logo. So we know that these all correspond to logo. Now I'll need to adjust these so that they're the right width. But it'd be nice if it started wider and then gradually got narrower as the logo formed, so that the sound wave was almost the full width at the beginning. If we select both of these matrix objects, switch to the Object tab, at the moment they're set to a count of 30. Let's set that to 15. And let's set the size to be, say, 1000. Okay. And you can see that we've immediately got a problem. Now the reason for this is because we only have 15 matrices, but on our splines, of course, we have 30 points. So we could go back to the tracer, or we could just press Shift F9, bring up our structure, and if we just select one of these, you can see that we've got all of these points. So we need to kind of select all of these, like so. So we have 0 to 14. If we switch to point mode, you can see we've selected all those points. We can delete those now. And we can do the same for both of those splines. The problem doing it this way, of course, is that our bottom spline is going to be in the wrong place. Because we deleted all the points from one side of it, all the other points are over the other side, and we need it to line up with the top spline. In the previous examples, the splines weren't moving, so that they were in the same place. But now what I want to do is I want to start with the sound wave wider and make it come smaller. So the easiest way to do that is to make sure that the bottom spline points line up with the matrix bottom. So we can take this espresso tag, let's just control drag, put that onto our bottom logo. Let's open that up. And you can see here that we have tracer bottom logo. It's linked to this object because this is set to use the object that it's on, but this is still linked to the matrix top logo. But all we need to do is drop that matrix bottom logo on there, and then the points of this will line up with our matrix. Now we need to work out how we're going to go from our sound wave into our logo. And the way that I propose to do this, as I said before, we could do it with a motion inheritance, but I'm going to do it using a spline effector. We've essentially got this bottom matrix creating this bottom spline, this top matrix creating the top spline. We then have a loft that links them together, and we use that to create our geometry. So if we take our matrix top, let's just unhide that, and you can see there it is. If we come to our MoGraph menu with that selected, choose Effector and add in a spline effector. Let's call this spline logo. Drop that onto the logo layer. In this extrude, we actually have the spline that we want to link to. So let's switch that extrude off, select this spline and uncheck close spline, because if we don't uncheck that, we've got a line all the way along the bottom here. Well, let's just leave it. Select our spline effector and drop that spline into there. And you can see now that we have all these matrices along the bottom here as well. Whoops. Okay, so what we're going to do is select that and uncheck close spline, like so. Because this spline effector comes after the sound effector, it totally takes over, and if we press play now, you can see that we don't have any of that bouncing up and down. If we switch that off, you can see we now bounce up and down with our sound wave. So what we can do essentially is we can animate this strength parameter. So there we're halfway between the two. Now if we enable our loft, you can see that we've almost created our M shape. There are a few problems, of course, and that's because the bottom matrix is still very wide. So what I want to do is animate this so that it fits the width exactly. And as I animate the width of this, I want us to also animate the top one. And as I do that, I also want to animate the fall off of the sound effector. And the easiest way to animate all of those simultaneously is simply to use Espresso. So if we just choose and add an Espresso tag to our matrix bottom logo, let's drag that in. Let's choose from our object properties size X, and let's drag our matrix top and link that into the same parameter. So as we animate the size X parameter of our matrix bottom, then the matrix top will follow along. Now you might want to manually time this to the music, but what I'm going to do is go to my timeline key mode and let's come to say frame 90, matrix bottom, and let's set the size here to be, let's just drag that in, and we want that to line up with the bottom of our M spline, something like so. Let's say 445. Let's just add a key here, and then let's jump back to say frame 25. We set that back up to 1000, like so. And if we switch off the spline effector for a moment, you'll see that as that animates, you can see that the matrix kind of gets narrower. Next thing we want to do is take our sound effector, enable fall off again. Okay, and we need that to match, otherwise we're going to get this horrible peak, etc. At the beginning here, it probably looks great. You can see that it's still just outside. If that was set to say 500, it would be correct, because this has got a size of 1000. So what we really need is this fall off to be half the size of our matrix, because obviously this is a radius. So we can open up that Espresso again. We can drag this sound effector into here, and we can add the input of our fall off size, like so. And then we just really need to add in a maths node. Drag our size X into here, set this to be divide it by 2, and that'll be half the amount, and then we can drag that into there. So now if we drag, you can see that as that animates, that curve looks cool, the fall off's working, it's matching with it. So we can hide that fall off again, we don't really want to see that all the time. The other thing that'd be quite nice is select our material, let's select floor. If we switch to the editor, we can just switch off color from the editor display, so we see it with a black background, which is a bit more like the final result. Okay, so we can probably hide these matrix objects for now, and we can also hide that spline to give us a better idea of what it's going to look like. So the last thing that we need to do is we just need to animate our spline effector. If I enable that, you can see, okay, so that's meant to be RM, so there's something not quite right at the moment. Let's come to the very end. It looks like one of the splines is flipped. If we just choose to show lines, it's very dense. Probably doesn't need to be that dense, but you can see it's blatantly, the points are crossing over each other. So we need to just address that problem. So what we essentially need to do is take our spline, the bottom one for instance, and reverse the sequence. And if we select that spline and right click and choose reverse sequence, it doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is because it's controlled by Espresso. If we switch that off and then try reverse sequence, and there we go, and you can see that's now working correctly. This is the kind of result we want. Okay, the curve isn't exactly right. You can spend a bit more time getting that correct, but we need that Espresso to be active so that the spline will match our matrix object. So essentially what we need to do is come in here and reverse this iteration. So instead of starting at 0 and ending at 15, or the point number, we need to start 15 and work backwards. Now the iteration note doesn't work like that, unfortunately, so it's a little bit more complicated. Or is it? Before you start getting deep in Espresso, let's have a look at the setup and think if there's an easier way to do it. We're using the spline effector to link onto that spline. We could probably reverse it in there. If we switch to the effector tab, you can see we've got a start and an end parameter. If we take that start parameter and drag that, you can see it's moving along that curve all the way to the end. And if we take it back the other way, and there you go. So sometimes things aren't always as complicated as they seem, and that one actually got me stumped for a bit, and then this was the simplest solution that I came up with. So there you go, you can see now that's working. And if we come back to our timeline, you can see that at frame 90 we're in the right place. So what we want to do is get our spline effector and just pull that back down so that we can see our sound wave. Let's select that sound effector, and we could probably make that, you know, less detail, fewer peaks and troughs, just by perhaps reducing the range here, because we don't want that much detail. It's not going to morph into that M very well. We want it to be much simpler. Let's reduce the frequency to like 500, and let's reduce the bandwidth down as well. Let's put that as 500. And now if we scrub, you can see it's a little bit simpler. You know, it's almost like making the M shape on its own. So that means that if we come here to frame 90, say, let's just turn the audio on. So around 90 there's a tch. We could kind of bang it into place on that. So I'm not going to spend time keyframing this to the audio. That's something that you guys could do, and you're probably using a different audio track anyway. But the trick to this is to take this spline effector. Let's say on frame 90 we add a key for the strength at 0, and then let's like scrub forward a little bit, a few frames, and let's actually set that to be like 150 and add a key, and then let's just go forward 2 or 3 frames, set that to say 75, and then finally set it to 100. Obviously I didn't spend much time on that. In fact, I didn't set that to 100. There we go. So now when we get here, there. It was a bit sudden, but of course you guys can spend time fine-tuning that kind of result. And there you go, and you can see we end up. So we start with our sound wave, like that. And perhaps what we want to do is just take this sound effector. Let's pull that down. Set that to 0. Let's say come to frame 25. Set that to 100, just so that we ease that in as well. So now if we rewind, press play. And there you go. If we bring on all of our audio waves, rewind, press play. And there we go. So obviously it needs a lot of fine tuning. You get the general idea. We need to add in our cloth, bring on that audio. Okay, And there you go. So that brings us to the end of this week's class. I hope you enjoyed it. This week, obviously we took the idea a bit further. We looked at some of the fallbacks of working with the tracer, how it can not work with network rendering. We did some Expresso. We worked out how to make our own tracer with Expresso. Fairly simple, by using a matrix object and then linking our spline points to that. We then duplicated it a few times, created some materials, set up our scene with a little bit of a camera animation, and then we added in the logo with the spline effector, so that morphs into the spline at the end. So I hope you enjoyed the class. Next week we start another project. It's going to span the last 3 weeks, and we're going to get a bit down and dirty with a lot more MoGraph, some Expresso, all that kind of stuff. Should be a lot of fun, and hopefully you guys will enjoy it. If you took this idea any further and you've got anything to show, please post it in the forums. I'm sure everyone would love to see. I know that I would. Other than that, if you've got any questions, let me know. Have a great week, and I'll see you all next time. Thank you for watching. Okay, apologies for this little bit tagged on the end, but I actually forgot to show you how to bake your splines down to PLA keyframes, which is the whole point of these Expresso tags. So probably a good idea that I show you that. It's really quick and simple, but if you don't know how to do it, then obviously it's not quite so easy. If we just fold out all of those and I come up to our filter here, we can actually hold down Control and click on this eyeball for our spline to just isolate those, and we only need the ones that have got the Expresso tags on. So let's just select those, and if we grab those and just drag them into the timeline like so, now we can just come back up and Control click on there to show all of our objects and hide that filter. Now in the timeline itself, if we select those objects, then come up to the Functions menu and choose Bake Objects. Now we want to bake them for the full duration of the timeline, and we want to bake expressions, so that's the important part. Now you can create a copy and you can create clean tracks. In other words, it will remove any keys that are already there. I'm going to uncheck Create Copy because I don't want to create a copy of all of these. And we don't want position or rotation or parameter, we just want PLA. And then you click OK. Okay, and then it's going to run through, and bang, there we go. So now we have keys for all of those elements, and you can then come in and you should be able to now disable all of these Expresso tags. There's another one, and everything should still work. And there we go. So there's no Expresso involved there, so those splines are moving based on these point level animation keys. So that's how you would bake that out. So once again, thanks for watching, and see you next time.